The air in Viridian Biotech felt thick, almost viscous, as I stepped through the glass doors. The sound of them hissing shut behind me echoing like the finality of a closing chapter. I had been desperate enough to ignore the warnings, the whispered tales of isolation studies gone awry, and the eerie reputation the biotech facility had garnered over the years. Tuition bills loomed like dark clouds, and I needed the cash. I could endure anything for a short while, couldn't I? The sterile white walls of the reception area made me feel smaller, swallowed by the clinical brightness. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, creating an ambiance that was both unnervingly sterile and oddly suffocating. I took a moment to steady myself, my heart thrumming a nervous rhythm against my ribcage. This wasn't just a job. It was an experiment, a deep dive into the unknown. My breath caught in my throat as I approached the front desk, where a woman with sharp features and an impenetrable expression awaited me. She was the embodiment of professionalism, her gaze unwavering as I fumbled with the stack of forms before me. "Leo, right?" she asked, her voice smooth and cool as glass. It felt as if she could see through me, peeling back layers of desperation and doubt. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. "Please have a seat." She gestured toward a chair that looked too rigid to be comfortable. I settled into it, the plastic creaking beneath me, and she slid a clipboard toward me. "You'll need to sign the non-disclosure agreement before we proceed." I glanced down at the document, words blurring together as I read the fine print. It was a standard contract, or so I told myself, nothing that would bind me to anything sinister. But the longer I stared, the more I felt the weight of the room pressing against me, the sterile air thickening like fog. "What exactly will this study entail?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Her expression remained unchanged, a mask of neutrality. "Participants will be observed in an isolated environment. We'll monitor your psychological responses to various stimuli. It's a controlled study. You'll have a private room, and your interactions will be limited." She paused, as if weighing her words. "But you should know, isolation can sometimes have unintended effects." Unintended effects. The phrase hung in the air, laden with a heavy dread that settled into my stomach. I could feel the chill of it creeping up my spine. "What kind of effects?" I pressed, although part of me didn't want to know. "Everyone reacts differently. Some find clarity, others experience disorientation or heightened anxiety. It's all part of the experiment." Her eyes bored into mine, a glimmer of something unreadable flickering behind them, a challenge, perhaps, or a warning. I swallowed hard, a lump forming in my throat. "And how long will this last?" "Depends on your responses," she replied, her voice almost too calm, as if she had uttered these words countless times. "But it could be anywhere from a few days to a few weeks. You'll be compensated well for your time." I nodded, though the thought of being confined within the sterile walls of this place made my skin crawl. I could feel the shadows beginning to stir just at the edge of my thoughts, but I brushed them aside. This was just a means to an end. "Okay, I'll sign." As I gripped the pen, the tip hovered above the paper, trembling slightly. The sound of the pen scratching against the surface felt like a death knell, echoing through the silence. I signed my name, a single stroke that felt like a pact with something unseen. The moment the ink dried, I felt a shift in the air, a weight settling upon my shoulders, an invisible chain locking me into this decision. "Welcome aboard," she said, the corners of her mouth barely twitching upward, as if she were amused by some private joke. "We'll take you to your room now. Please follow me." I stood, legs feeling unsteady, as I followed her down a corridor lined with doors. Each one looked identical, a monotonous row of unmarked entryways. My heart raced with every step, anticipation mingling with dread. I stole furtive glances at the walls, where shadows danced just out of sight, twisting and curling against the harsh lights. I was acutely aware of the silence that enveloped us, punctuated only by the soft thud of my footsteps. "Here we are," she said finally, stopping before a door at the end of the hall. She swiped a card through the lock, and the door clicked open with a soft sigh, revealing a small, bare room. A single bed, a desk, and a window that looked out onto a bleak expanse of concrete and steel. "Everything you need is inside," she continued, her voice echoing slightly in the empty space. "You'll be monitored remotely. If you need anything, a button will connect you to a staff member. Remember, you're here to observe yourself as much as we are here to observe you." As she turned to leave, I stepped inside, the door closing behind me with a finality that sent a shiver down my spine. Alone in my isolation, I felt the weight of the contract I had just signed press heavily on my chest. The light flickered slightly, and for a moment, I wondered if the shadows I had felt creeping in were merely tricks of my imagination, or something far more sinister lurking just beyond the glass. The door of the isolation suite clicked softly behind me, an echoing sound that felt final, like a prison cell locking shut. I stood in the center of the room, my heart drumming in a rhythm that felt out of sync with the sterile environment. The walls, painted a muted shade of gray, loomed over me, their surfaces smooth and unyielding. A single overhead light flickered intermittently, casting long shadows that danced like specters along the floor. I took a deep breath, attempting to center myself. This was just temporary, I reminded myself. A few weeks, a simple exchange, my solitude for a paycheck. But as I surveyed the room, a disquiet settled in my stomach. The suite was too quiet, the silence oppressive, wrapping around me like a thick fog. I could almost hear the hum of the fluorescent lights, an unsettling background noise that became a living entity in the stillness. I moved cautiously, my feet barely making a sound on the cold tile floor. A small table stood in the corner, its surface bare except for a single notebook and a pen. I walked over, feeling a strange compulsion to document my thoughts. Perhaps it was a way to stave off the creeping anxiety that threatened to engulf me. I opened the notebook, the pages blank and waiting. With each stroke of the pen, the words poured out, a mixture of observations and reassurances. The act of writing grounded me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my words were being recorded by unseen eyes. The surveillance cameras, I recalled, had been pointed out during the orientation. They were everywhere, those discreet black domes nestled in the corners, their lenses always watching. I felt the weight of their gaze, an invasive presence that gnawed at my nerves. It was as if the cameras had a mind of their own, scrutinizing not just my actions, but my very thoughts. I glanced around, half expecting to see a figure in a lab coat peering back at me from behind the glass. But there was only the relentless quiet, punctuated by the occasional hum of machinery somewhere beyond the walls. As evening fell, the shadows deepened, stretching across the room like fingers reaching out for me. I settled into the small cot against the wall, its mattress thin and uninviting. The sheets smelled faintly of antiseptic, a reminder of the clinical nature of this place. I closed my eyes, desperate to escape the oppressive atmosphere, but sleep eluded me. Instead, I lay there listening to the subtle creaks and groans of the building as it settled for the night. Then it happened. A flicker of movement caught my eye. I opened my eyes, heart racing, and turned my head toward the window, a sleek one-way pane that separated me from whatever lay beyond. At first, there was nothing, just the reflection of my own wide-eyed face staring back at me. But then, a shadow flitted past, too swift to identify. I blinked, and it was gone. Perhaps it was a trick of the light, a remnant of my overactive imagination. Yet a chill seeped into my bones, an unsettling notion that I was not alone in this isolation. I sat up, the sheets rustling around me, and strained to listen. The silence felt thicker now, charged with an energy that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I forced myself to breathe steadily, to dismiss the creeping dread. But it was no use. My mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. What if there were other subjects? What if they were watching me too, hidden away in their own isolation suites? The notion gnawed at me, a persistent itch in my mind. I glanced at the notebook, my attempts to document my thoughts now feeling futile. The words I had written seemed to mock me, trivial compared to the reality of my situation. I was trapped in a glass box, surrounded by an unseen audience. I could feel their eyes on me, dissecting my every move, my every breath. As the hours dragged on, I became hyper-aware of every sound. The soft whir of the ventilation system, the distant thump of footsteps echoing in the hallways beyond. It was a reminder that the world continued outside, yet here I was, ensnared in this cocoon of isolation. The flickering light overhead cast an eerie glow, and I found myself staring at the ceiling, waiting for something, anything, to break the monotony. And then it came again, the flicker of shadow darting across my peripheral vision. This time it lingered, a dark silhouette just beyond the glass. My heart raced as I turned slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. But when I looked, there was nothing, just my reflection, pale and wide-eyed, staring back at me. I lay back down, trembling, the realization sinking in that the isolation was more than just a physical confinement. It was a psychological labyrinth designed to unravel me. I was an experiment, a pawn in a game far beyond my comprehension. And as the night deepened, I could feel the boundaries of my sanity beginning to blur, the isolation seeping into my very soul. The days blurred into one another, the sterile white walls of my isolation suite becoming a prison I could not escape. Each tick of the clock echoed like a heartbeat, a relentless reminder of the time slipping away from me. I had thought I could endure this experiment, the solitude and the ever-watchful eyes behind the glass. Yet, as the nights crept in, the darkness brought with it a more insidious presence, one that gnawed at the edges of my sanity. It began subtly, the sounds, a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls, rattling my bones, settling deep in my chest. I would lay in my bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, listening. At first, it was just the air conditioning, a familiar whir that blended into the background of my existence. But soon, as the hours ticked past, it morphed into something else entirely. A soft scratching, like fingernails against wood, rustled in the corners of the room. A whisper of movement that sent my heart racing. I would sit up, breath hitching in my throat, straining to discern the source, but it always eluded me. I tried to convince myself it was merely my mind playing tricks, a byproduct of isolation. I recalled the words of the researcher from our initial meeting, the one who had smiled too wide, his teeth gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Isolation can heighten your senses, he had said, but it can also distort your perception of reality. I had laughed nervously at the time, but now those words twisted in my mind like a serpent coiling tighter and tighter. One night, as I lay in bed, the scratching grew louder, more insistent. It was as if something or someone was trying to break through. The sound sent shivers down my spine, awakening a primal fear that I could not shake. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, the cool floor sending a jolt through me. I felt the urge to investigate, to confront whatever was lurking in the shadows. The moment my feet touched the ground, the room dipped into silence, the scratching ceasing abruptly. I stood there for a moment, heart racing, weighing my options. The thought of calling for help crossed my mind, but the oppressive isolation weighed heavily on me. I pulled the thin blanket around my shoulders and ventured towards the door, the cold metal handle sending a jolt of anxiety through me. As I stepped out into the hallway, the fluorescent lights flickered above, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. The air felt thick, heavy with something unnameable, and for the first time, I felt a deep-seated dread settle in my chest, a sense that I was not alone. I tiptoed down the corridor, the sterile white tiles cool against my bare feet, each step echoing like a distant heartbeat. I reached the observation room, the glass window that separated me from the researchers. My breath quickened, a mix of anger and desperation surging through me. I pressed my palms against the cold surface, trying to peer inside. The researchers were there, but their faces were obscured by the shadows, their conversations hushed and indecipherable. I knocked, my fist connecting with the glass, a dull thud that resonated in the silence. "Hey, what's going on? I need to talk to you." For a moment, nothing happened. Then a figure shifted in the shadows, and one of the researchers approached the glass, a look of mild annoyance etched across his face. "Leo," he said, his voice muffled but still clear in the oppressive stillness, "you need to return to your suite. This isn't the time for questions." "But," I protested, but my voice faltered under the weight of his gaze. There was something unsettling in his eyes, an emptiness that sent a chill racing down my spine. It was as if he were looking through me, seeing something that I could not comprehend. "Return," he repeated, his tone brooking no argument. I stumbled back, the weight of his command pressing heavy on my chest. The fear coiled tighter, a serpent ready to strike. I turned away, retreating to my suite, but the scratching sounds returned, this time accompanied by a low, guttural whisper that seemed to seep through the very walls. "Leo," it called, a voice that sent ice flooding through my veins. "Help us." I froze, the words wrapping around me like a vice. Who was calling? What did they need? I pressed my back against the door, my breath quickening, the air in my lungs growing thin. I was no longer just the subject in an experiment. I was a witness to something far more sinister, something that blurred the lines between observer and observed, reality and nightmare. I knew then that I had to confront the truth behind my observation. I had to delve deeper into this chilling descent, for I could feel the chilling tendrils of dread creeping closer, ready to engulf me whole. I had entered this study for money, but what price would I pay for the truth? The sterile white walls of my isolation suite felt oppressive, like they were closing in on me, suffocating the last remnants of my sanity. I had spent days, perhaps even weeks, lost in this liminal space, where time seemed to stretch and warp like the shadows that danced in the corners of my mind. My heart pounded like a distant drum, a rhythmic reminder of the reality I was slowly slipping away from. The hum of the fluorescent lights above buzzed incessantly, a maddening drone that clung to my thoughts like a thick fog. I had long since stopped counting the hours. Each tick of the clock echoed in my mind, a cruel reminder of the passage of time I could not escape. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, the thin mattress sagging under my weight. The air felt heavy, saturated with a palpable tension, as if the very atmosphere conspired against me. I could sense it, lurking just out of sight, the otherness that had crept into my consciousness. The feeling was akin to a whisper in the dark, a chilling promise that something was not right. It was during one of those suffocating moments, when the silence pressed against my ears, that I noticed the camera. It had always been there, perched in the corner of the room, its unblinking lens a constant reminder of my isolation. But now it felt different, alive. As I stared into its glossy surface, I could almost hear it breathing, a sinister rhythm that matched my own heartbeat. I shuddered and turned away, unwilling to confront the truth of my situation. I spent hours pacing the small confines of my suite, my mind racing with unanswered questions. Why had I been chosen for this study? What were they watching for? I had thought I understood the nature of the experiment, that I would be observed to gauge the effects of prolonged isolation on the human psyche. But now, as the shadows lengthened and the light began to fade, I felt a gnawing sense of dread seep into my bones, a premonition that the true purpose of this study was far more insidious. My thoughts spiraled into a dark abyss, and I began to hear the whispers again, the voices that had haunted my dreams and twisted my reality. They spoke of shadows and secrets, of hidden truths lurking beneath the surface. I pressed my palms against my ears, desperate to drown out their insistent murmurs, but they only grew louder, echoing through the hollow chambers of my mind. In a moment of clarity, I realized I needed to confront the researchers, to demand answers. The thought of standing before them sent a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. I had to know what this was all about, what they were truly observing. So I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation ahead. As I stepped into the narrow corridor that led to the observation room, the fluorescent lights flickered ominously, casting erratic shadows that danced along the walls. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon me, the researchers watching from behind their glass walls, their expressions obscured by the glare. The sterile chill of the air wrapped around me, sending a shiver down my spine as I approached the door. I knocked hesitantly, the sound echoing hollowly in the empty hall. Moments later, the door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a sterile room filled with monitors and blinking lights. The researchers sat behind a long table, their faces obscured by the glow of the screens. They looked up, their gazes piercing as if they were assessing my very soul. "Leo," one of them said, their voice smooth yet unsettling, "we've been waiting for you." "Waiting for me?" I echoed, my voice trembling. "What is this? What are you really studying?" The lead researcher, a woman with sharp features and cold eyes, leaned forward, her fingers steepled in front of her. "You are part of something far greater than you can comprehend. This study is not merely about isolation. It's about observation on a grand scale." My heart sank. The words hung heavy in the air, coiling around me like a serpent, squeezing the breath from my lungs. "What do you mean? I don't understand." "Your reality is not your own," she said softly, almost as if she were trying to comfort me. "You are part of an experiment that transcends time and space. We observe how fear and isolation can warp perception, how they can distort the very fabric of one's reality." A chill raced down my spine as the implications crashed over me like a wave. This was not just about me. I was a pawn in a game far beyond my understanding. The boundaries of the world I had known were unraveling, and I was powerless to stop it. As I stumbled back, the lights flickered again, plunging the room into darkness for a heartbeat. In that brief moment, I caught a glimpse of the truth. The monitors, the researchers, the sterile walls, they were all part of a larger design. There were no boundaries here, no escape. Panic surged through me, threatening to consume me whole. I turned to flee, but the door slammed shut, trapping me in this waking nightmare. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a tempest, and I realized with a jolt that I was not alone. The other subjects were out there, lost in their own spirals of despair. And I was just another thread in this dark tapestry of observation. In that moment, the true horror of my situation crystallized. I was a mere observer of my own unraveling, trapped in a cycle of dread. And as I clawed at the walls of my mind, I understood. I was never meant to leave this place.